afternoon, good morning, and good evening to everyone attending this webinar, depending where you're joining from today. Whether you're here with us in Zoom or you're over in YouTube, I welcome you all to this amazing online session about hydrogen hubs. It is entitled, How Useful Are Hydrogen Hubs to Develop the Hydrogen Economy? And I think we have with us, the biggest experts in the country, so I'm very excited because I'm going to learn a great deal today. And so are you on that side. So yes, first of all, I'd like to ask you to introduce yourselves, use the chat to introduce yourselves, your company, and also where you're joining from today, because we love to hear it on this side. And myself, my name is Belén Gallego. I work for the RENMAD team. I'm based in Madrid, so it's a little bit late for me here today. And our panelists, they will introduce themselves and tell you where they're based today. But please do introduce yourselves. Before we start, I'd just like to tell you that we're organizing this webinar in the context of RENMAD H2 USA, which takes place in Las Vegas on the 12th and 13th of July. And we'd like to invite you all to attend, to participate of this event. The speakers that you're seeing here on screen today are going to be there, and we really hope that you join us too. So for the chat, please introduce yourself. But your questions, and it's very important that you said your questions, because today's session is a panel session, which is going to be moderated by the great Roxana, and I'm going to give the floor to her very, very soon. But for the questions, please send them through the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, because it just makes it a lot easier for us to manage the questions, and to dismiss them once they've been answered. Makes our job a hell of a lot easier on this side. On top of that, I'd just like to ask the people in YouTube to also please introduce yourself through the chat and to send your questions through the chat, because you don't get a QA box in there, but we will make sure to check so that we can bring them to the Zoom room, okay? Other than that, I'd just like to remind you that we're recording this session and that we will send you the recordings and also the materials, whatever materials there are for this session. And that you'll get an email with a link, and then you can check it there, you can share it with your colleagues, and so on and so forth. So just remember, for the chat, just to chat and see who's in the room, for the Q&A box where you send your questions. And without further ado, Roxana, the floor is yours. Let's begin with the conversation.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for joining us. Hopefully you'll be coming to the conference in July. We'll be there. And I am Roxana Bekemohammadi, just in case that name is tough. And I am the founder and executive director of the U.S. Hydrogen Alliance. Our alliance is actually very much focused on policy development for the hydrogen industry. And really, we're working on developing common sense policies across each state in the U.S. so we can ensure that this industry has as many or as much of an opportunity to succeed by uniform or at least harmonized policies across the US. I come to you as a fellow nerd, actually. I'm a chemical and environmental engineer. I graduated from the National Fuel Cell Research Center and have worked in policy my entire career. And so I look forward to covering a number of issue areas with our esteemed panelists. And from that point, I'm going to move on to actually introductions of our panelists. So I'm going to introduce Abe Mooney first. If you can go ahead and introduce yourself, we would greatly appreciate it.
Hello, everyone. My name is Abraham or Abe Mooney. Let's see. 2 years ago, I was working at TriMet. That's the transit agency here in Portland, Oregon. So I have a transportation bias on hydrogen. And then about a year ago, I came to Obsidian, where I work today. We're a renewable energy developer. It used to be primarily solar, and I suppose it still is, but we turned our focus to hydrogen over 2 years ago. In fact, we like to brag that we were working on hydrogen hubs since before bipartisan infrastructure law even passed. And so we've got some tenure under our belt working on hydrogen hubs. So I'm excited to be here today. I look forward to some questions, and let's get started.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I'm going to next hand it over to Angelina Galiteva. And thank you so much. I already mispronounced it. Okay, go ahead.
Right, great. Happy to be here. Thank you, Roxana. Thank you, fellow panelists, and thank you for everyone participating. And thank you to ATA for organizing this very important and timely event. So my name is Angelina Galitova. I've mostly been working on the utility and renewable energy development side. I'm also on the board of the California Independent System Operator, so I do have a grid operator perspective on many of the electricity related issues as well, and specifically integrating renewables into the grid. As we all know, California, as the largest economy, one of the largest, the fourth largest in the world, is dedicated to transitioning to 100% renewables for all sectors by 2045, and the electricity sector in that timeline as well. So as we decarbonize the grid and we decarbonize industry and agriculture and transportation and aviation and shipping, it's become pretty clear that we need a fuel. So we need electrons as well as molecules. And I'm also the founder of Renewables 100 Policy Institute, which is one of the organizations creating the Alliance for Renewable Clean Hydrogen Energy Systems, or the Hub for California for Hydrogen, where we are dedicated to making sure that hydrogen is optimized as it's introduced in a sustainable ecosystem development fashion to decarbonize the fourth largest economy of the world. So it's a very exciting time, a very key time for hydrogen, and absolutely important that we get the policies, the technologies, and the rollout right. So happy to work with everyone to ensure that this happens on a sustained and geographically widespread basis.
Thank you so much, Angelina. So I'm going to hand it over to our next speaker, Oleksiy Tatarenko.
Thank you, Roxana, and it's a pleasure to be here. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone, wherever you are in the world. My name is Oleksiy. I'm a senior principal on RMI Climate Aligned Industry Team. For those of you who are not familiar with RMI is a think, do, and scale tank that has been focusing on energy transition for more than 40 years by now. And I think the focus currently is heavily on do and scale aspects, which is great moment to be on the energy transition journey at this point of time. With respect to the climate aligned industry team, I'm leading hydrogen initiatives on the team, and well, the team has grown to almost 100 people by now. The climate aligned industry team, and we are covering all the main what are called harder to abate sectors, be it on the industry side or on the transport side. And you know, the hydrogen team itself is 35 people by now in RMI, and you know, relevant initiatives. I think that's worthwhile mentioning here for this discussion that my team is leading or supporting. Are the Green Hydrogen Catapult, which we've established with the United Nations high-level champions about 3 years ago before COP26, that unites all the big green hydrogen developers, but also, you know, front movers from off-take sectors that took a commitment to scale up renewable based hydrogen to 45 gigawatt by 2027. The second initiative, bringing it closer to the US, that we have is supporting and acting as strategic advisor to the hydrogen hubs. We've been acting as a strategic advisor to 5 hydrogen hubs to help them to prepare their DOE applications that have been filed back in April. And we continue working with some of the hubs, including Arches that Angelina represents. And you know, finally, we also work directly with the flagship projects and under another grant where we are focusing on industrial decarbonization and therefore working with the companies to support them directly, you know, to accelerate their final investment decisions and deploy capital as quickly as possible. Back to you, Roxana. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much. I think it's fair to say that we do believe that these hydrogen hubs is helping make a huge impact on our US hydrogen economy. But the question is, how useful? And so we're about to go to each member of our panel to specifically talk about how the hydrogen hubs has helped create demand in and around their projects. But let me first say this. We are in an active solicitation. It's a highly sensitive time. And so I just want to first say is that we're going to be answering these questions in a very broad manner. So I'm first going to go to Abe to talk a little bit about how the hydrogen hubs has created some demand in and around your region, or things that you have seen essentially.
Great, thanks, Roxana. Here at Obsidian, I have to say our primary focus really is utilities and their interest in hydrogen for peaker plants, to put it plainly. We like to make it more complicated than that. We like to call them dispatchable power or dispatchable renewable energy. But really, if you know the utility industry, these are peaker plants. And we see a lot of interest around Oregon and Washington for hydrogen to fuel peaker plants, mostly existing. Actually, that's part of why it's such a cool play, is these are combustion turbines that already exist and they already have transmission, and we refuel them, or we just mix in some hydrogen with natural gas. The Hydrogen Hub Fund, of course, makes all of this much more financially viable. I actually have one piece of information I can share. I appreciate the sensitivity you mentioned, Roxana, which is we have a utility in Central Washington, Grant County. It's a PUD, and they're very, very much sold on the whole concept. We actually think it'll go ahead even without the hydrogen hub, but obviously the beauty of the hub is it allows you to expand your base. The community development requirement, is that the right term I want to use? The community benefits requirement is very helpful, right? It means that we can not just apply to the utility, but maybe also to transportation, for example. I mentioned my bias on that earlier. I think transportation is going to be hard to make happen. It's just, you have to build out that demand. And it's not there yet, at least not as much in Oregon. But if we can start it somewhere with the early adopters, and I mentioned utilities being our first target here in Oregon, then you can build a little more of your assets thanks to some of these this funding that we're talking about today. And then it's available for the other early adopters, with transportation being one of those sort of other categories that we're very keenly interested in. And I'll leave you with one last thing. We're responding to comments for the DOE today, right? This is just like Roxana said, we're right in the middle of this. And I'll be probably staying up late tonight trying to hone our message on transportation. It didn't seem like as important of a subject matter because, as I mentioned, utilities is sort of the big offtake that we see. But I think transportation is going to be extremely important, and that's where I'll be doing late tonight. So I'll leave you with that.
But before I transition to the next person, as the moderator, I am responsible for the Q&As, and the most important question I think has come up, which we probably should have addressed from the very beginning. Abe, where did you get that shirt? We're in love.
Well, that is an important question. I was buying stickers for my 10-year-old son, and he wanted some random sticker, but I had to buy myself some stuff too. So I got stickers and I got a hydrogen shirt. So now I get to wear a t-shirt at the office, which I'm pretty happy about.
Okay. Well, whenever you get a chance to put that in the Q&A, we're curious about where you got it from.
You want me to do some advertising? Okay, I'll do that.
Yeah, free advertising. We should have gone commission for it, darn it. So Angelina, I'm going to go to you next. What are your thoughts on this frontier?
Well, it's definitely a new frontier, and it's where we're grateful that there is a opportunity to create hubs throughout the nation, and specifically focused on the green energy and the green hydrogen hubs, or the renewable clean energy hubs. We'd like to see that success in California. We'd like to see it on a statewide basis. We believe that it's important to approach it as a system and on a system level. and ensure the requirements that the DOE has, that you match supply and demand, more or less on a geographic basis, that you've got transportation and storage for the hydrogen as well, and that's addressed. And as Abe pointed out, 20% of the evaluation is community benefits plans. And what are the community benefits plans? The EJ40, 40% of the benefits have to flow to the communities that are within the footprint of the projects. We believe that the projects will be beneficial in many respects in terms of not only reducing greenhouse gas, but actually having a tangible input on air quality and an impact on improving that situation as well. We've seen with our systems analysis that the project locations more or less are where the disadvantaged communities are. And we want to address those issues because hydrogen has an impact on air quality, and that's very important to us. We're also very keen on developing jobs and making sure that we have the partnerships within the framework for that jobs component and jobs growth as well. We're also working with universities and community colleges and other programs to ensure that we've got kind of a pathway and a roadway for people to enter that work stream and that they have the training available to them to develop those long-term good green energy jobs as well. So that's very, very critical for us in ensuring that we have the opportunity for this to be a sustained ecosystem, that hydrogen meets the goal of achieving that $2 per kilogram goal in the 5 years for the hub duration by 2032, and then is on track to meet the $1 per kilogram hydrogen shot program that the DOE has. And that would entail scale up. That would entail increasing production and increasing offtake and working with the key industries that are going to ensure that offtake. Certainly we see power as a key player, we see ports as a key player, we see transportation as a key player, and long-term working with RMI and others, developing aviation, agriculture, and other industries that are also impacted by hydrogen, where we can have huge impacts that we wouldn't be able to achieve by other technologies because we do need the fuels, whether that's cement manufacturing or other heavy-duty industries and refineries as well. So super exciting time to decarbonize across the board, the whole economy, including buildings, including aviation, shipping, industry, agriculture, transportation. As I said, we need to have an additional fuel option that is technically an electrical fuel created by renewables and water and having a sustainable footprint statewide.
Thank you so much, Angelina. Oleksiy, do you want to talk a little bit more about how we're creating demand in general and how that's helping, demand via the U.S. hubs and how that's helping the general U.S. hydrogen economy?
Yeah, happy to, Roxana. I think I'll maybe start with your key question before diving into demand about like how important hydrogen hubs are overall, right? As one of the approaches that is being taken, by the government, but also by the industry and state level players, because these are true public-private partnerships that we see have emerged, right? In the past year or so, and I think what's important to recognize here is that hydrogen hubs are solving a very important problem, and in my view, the most important problem that hubs are solving is a coordination failure, right? And in absence of the well-functioning market, essentially hubs are playing the role of the platforms where the impartial information can be shared and coordination can happen, right? And that's super important because essentially they're playing that role of bringing the demand and supply together and doing that matchmaking while we are waiting and working actively on to shape the well-functioning market. And I just want to underline that because in our view, without this active role that hubs are playing in coordination space, there is a high risk that stakeholders in regions will move in separate directions, and there will be fragmentation of vital investments and unrealized synergies. And this is exactly the problem that hubs are solving by addressing that potential coordination failure through well-functioning public-private partnerships, right? So bringing this to demand, I think the previous speakers have correctly already pointed out what the main challenges are. I think in our mind we think about the demand sectors broadly, using three categories. One is a heavy transport, the other one is like heavy industry, and the third one is export. And I would like to say a few words in the end also on that category, because it hasn't been mentioned yet, but it's very relevant for the hubs that have emerged on the Gulf Coast in particular. I think what's important to recognize that different offtake sectors are on different timeline trajectory because of different scale of a challenge and different nature of these sectors. And I think with the heavy transport, the key challenge in our view is a coordination challenge, and how complex the value chains there are, right? Because to get to significant scale of hydrogen offtake, let's say with the heavy duty road transport, you need to talk about thousands of trucks on the road, right? And there you need to coordinate between fuel suppliers and OEMs that have to produce trucks, and of course, hydrogen producers that have to produce hydrogen, right? And everyone has to jump simultaneously almost, right? And that's why it's difficult to scale up, and still, even as we are talking now about big ambitions, the biggest projects that we see are still, at the pilot scale, that, trying to serve 30, 50, 60 trucks at max. And same with shipping, right? Again, we are pursuing actively the green shipping corridors agenda, but then you need to build a coalition. That takes time, bring everyone together. Again, you are competing against, very cheap bunker fuel. You need, to figure out how to pencil out the economic case, and, federal incentives might be not, alone might be not sufficient. So you need to think about how you can stack it up, with state level, maybe incentives. You need to think about, and that's what we are also dedicating time to, how to aggregate demand from those who are ready to pay a bit more for the green shipping services. And that's why we are creating book and claim system, for example, that we are planning to start testing and piloting soon, right? So that's the challenges on the heavy transport side. Then industry, the beauty of industry is, of course, that you can get to significant volumes very quickly, right? One steel mill will consume potentially hundreds of thousands of tons of hydrogen. Again, with fertilizers, petrochemicals, chemicals, you get to significant volumes quite soon. I think, of course, there are super price sensitive, sectors, and, quite often, again, you compete either against coal or natural gas. There are, as incumbent fuels are quite cheap in the US, right? And then finally, just a few words on exports. We believe that export will drive demand, particularly for renewable or hydrogen coming from the coast, and particularly with Europe serving as a big demand pool center initially, because essentially Europe is creating a differentiated market, targeting or focusing on renewable hydrogen specifically when it thinks about how to solve its energy crisis and what volumes of hydrogen and what kind of hydrogen it wants to import. So here, arises an opportunity for those players who are looking at those export opportunities to plug into potentially very big market. And here we are talking immediately about millions of tons by 2030, because Europe has signaled that it's going to import 10 million tons of renewable hydrogen by 2030, right? And therefore, we believe that that will be also an initial strong driver for demand, particularly for those hubs that have access to water and have access to cheap renewables, and particularly on the Gulf Coast, I think. So I would leave it at that and hand it over back to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Oleksiy. I have so many comments on that. But actually, to continue on that conversation, we do have a question from the audience where they are asking if there has been any, I'll call it coordination or any interest, any development on the commercial aviation side. I leave this actually to all of you to potentially.
I could speak to aviation, right? In fact, I think everybody's probably familiar with, or maybe they're not, Universal Hydrogen they just flew their first plane in Moses Lake. It's a small town in central Washington, happens to be right next to where we're developing our hub, Obsidian's hub. But they flew their first Dash 8. Dash 8 is a twin prop propeller plane just in March, a few months ago. So that's pretty exciting. It's here, it's real. They're using a fuel cell, a megawatt fuel cell that goes in the wing, right? It's one of the wings of the plane, and hydrogen to fuel cell to electric. So it's an electric plane, but it doesn't weigh as much as a battery electric plane. So it's happening. I still think it's going to take many years to get commercial, but of course, Universal Hydrogen is very bullish on that. Any other comments on that? Anybody?
I agree with you. It's certainly not the first industry we would start with, but certainly an industry that can be fully decarbonized through hydrogen fuels. And I think there's huge interest in seeing how that develops in the medium and further off future. I think the smaller planes, we're going to see more of them now, but the commercial airlines will probably take about a decade. But I'm hopeful that they transition sooner rather than later.
Well, and I'd like to add that, yeah, I think you're right, and that's what the Dash 8 is. It's small plane. But I've been doing a lot of research on combustion turbines, mostly for power generation. But I guess what I want to mention is just that you can burn 100% hydrogen in a combustion turbine today. Now, that may not be true for an airplane, but it is true for these other types of combustion turbines that are for making power. And my point here is that you could run the big planes on hydrogen through combustion, which some will argue is not the best pathway, but I think propeller planes have their limits, and so you need a combustion turbine to go overseas, and that's also a possible pathway with hydrogen. So it's very exciting in all classes of airplanes.
So let me hop in from a slightly different, and comment from a slightly different perspective, because lots has been covered on technology and how it may scale up, and I agree with everything that has been said. We as RMI are working more on a kind of a demand side or solving this equation, because the problem remains like how you close the gap with incumbent fuel. If you talk about hydrogen-based fuels in particular, that will be one of the main challenges there to solve. Right now, of course, most of the sustainable aviation fuel that we see in the market is HEFA type of fuel that also requires hydrogen for their production, but uses a different feedstock, right? So RMI jointly with EDF, Environmental Defense Fund, is essentially started and convened the initiative which is called Sustainable Aviation Buyers Alliance. And this initiative has grown right now to about like 20 companies, and we've got the big airlines there, like, and the airplane manufacturers such as Boeing. But most importantly, we've got under this umbrella the companies that want to be sustainable and reach their climate goals and ready to pay the green premium, because moving in particular people around the world is significant part of their carbon footprint. So we've got companies like Bank of America and BCG and McKinsey and Bain, so like almost all the big consultants, but also companies like Microsoft and some other banks like JP Morgan, Chase. So a number of companies that are willing to pay the green premium, and actually, this Buyers Alliance is working. I'm happy to report because we have procured collectively the first batch of sustainable aviation fuel, and saying I also include RMI because all our travels are now essentially happening with sustainable aviation fuel. So I think this is a blueprint in our view of how you get the market going, even if the policy stimulus are not strong enough to get it going from the very start. We've been working on this for quite some time, for this initiative for quite some time, couple of years by now, but we will be replicating it in all the other sectors, be it steel or shipping, because we do believe that the combination of the policy measures and market mechanisms, like the one that I've just described, can move the market forward much more quicker than any of this mechanism on standalone basis.
Thank you so much, Oleksiy. I just want to put out two things before we move on. I appreciate all of the comments that have been made, and actually you're going to help me pivot to the next topic area. But essentially, first of all, yes, there's been sustainable aviation fuels and other types of fuels that we're talking about quite a bit. And so there's still a number of different pathways essentially for what will end up being kind of the way that locomotives or commercial airplanes or whatever else, that needs to evolve away from fossil fuels, we'll essentially see. But there are those that are working specifically on hydrogen in the aviation sector. There are commercial airlines that are investing in it, and they're investing in some of them in hydrogen combustion, some of them in hydrogen fuel cells for motive, for mainly propulsion reasons, some of them for auxiliary power. So I just wanted to throw that out based on some of the questions in chat. I also wanted to bring up the fact that, before there was hubs, I always talked about ecosystems. I see seaports and airports as really important ecosystems, not because it's new and it's a topic, and yes, we're talking about hubs, but really because you have a lot of different end uses. So you can have massive consumption in one area. So I would always encourage you all to not just look at the planes. The planes are huge and massive end uses and consumers of hydrogen, but really the equipment on the ground. So the backup generators, the shuttle buses, any of the baggage equipment movers, essentially. So, even actually stationary and baseload power. So, I just want to throw that out there before we go to the next topic. So, Oleksiy, you brought this up really briefly about financial institutions, but can anyone, put in their 2 cents, literally or figuratively, about how investors are looking at the hydrogen hub money? I mean, I would think, and based on what I've heard, the kind of federal support that we're seeing here has been attractive to investors, and it gives them the green light to actually look into this industry more seriously, especially for those that are infrastructure developers. So I've laid the foundation here for this exciting conversation. I'm going to go to you, Abe. You've been shaking your head, so you'll be first, and then Angelina, go at it. And Oleksiy, you've touched upon it, but any other comments you have, please feel free.
Well, thank you. I'll be brief. I'm not very. I'm an engineer. Finance is something I'm learning drinking from a fire hose. But I'll just say that yes, Obsidian is very bullish on financing. We think we can get 4 times more money from equity financing compared to the amount of money that we're asking from the DOE. So, the DOE is a huge spark, right? Just an incredibly helpful spark. But, we think we can multiply that by 4 to build our whole project. So pretty exciting all around.
I think, and I've been trying to say this for quite a while now throughout the discussion, but it's important to point out, Oleksiy touched on it a little bit, is the fact that this DOE hub initiative has actually mobilized a lot of us to start thinking more of a systems approach, to start kind of evaluating what is the overall potential of hydrogen, and coordinating that potential so that you have a much more comprehensive and a much more symbiotic path for development. And we've discovered, excuse me, quite a lot of potential that we wouldn't have discovered but for the Hydrogen Hub and but for having that initiative to kind of analyze what it is. So in and of itself, that has sparked a lot of development, a lot of thinking, and a lot of knowledge that we've gained ahead of time that we probably would have gained over a much longer time frame and in a much more haphazard measure without the Hydrogen Hub. So I am grateful that this initiative exists and that it allowed us to do that. It also has provided a multiplier effect, because by having the funding available and seeing what that funding can unlock, and of course requiring that 50% minimum cost share, we've also discovered that there is an appetite that if you provide the right environment, like we did 10, 15 years ago for renewables, with transparency, consistency, and longevity, that investors are certainly looking into industries and participating in the energy transition. And if the environment is right from a policy framework and from a technology framework, and you have that visibility and opportunity to see scale and growth, that private money will certainly get excited and interested in participating. And that is one objective that the private-public partnerships certainly have squarely in our focus and want to ensure that it succeeds.
So let me try to hop in also and try to summarize this a bit and also put things into perspective, particularly for maybe European Union audience that I see we also have in abundance on this call. So like DOE hubs money is 8 billion of funding that will be allocated to 6 to 10 hubs. Well, in reality, that's going to be 7 billion that will be allocated directly, right? And I think it's important to put things into perspective. And in that context, on the private capital front, we will probably safely can estimate that multiplier for DOE money will be around 4, if not 5. I think Abraham that mentioned that already, and Angelina, I think you've also supported that view. So essentially, what we are talking about that for every $1 of DOE grant money, we are mobilizing at least $3 of private capital, right? And the reason to believe that this multiplier will be that high, we cannot disclose any sensitive information here, but what has been disclosed by DOE is that after the first round of this competition, there were 33 applicants who have successfully passed the first round, who have requested $33 billion from DOE and have put forward 96 billion of matching proposal, right? That's what gives you that $1 to $3 kind of ratio. And of course, it will be probably safe to assume that winning hubs will be even higher with a multiplier. So that's one point here. But I think the more important point, in my view, to be made here, emphasizing that coordination role, Angelina, that you brought up, is that essentially, this money coming as a grants toward direct hub support is just a fraction of overall funding which is out there, right? We've got $316 billion under bipartisan infrastructure law. Of course, this is not all for hydrogen, but a lot of, a huge chunk of this money is for infrastructure and for renewables, right? Then we've got under IRA, and again, estimates here, but I would use the one used by Credit Suisse, which is probably more conservative one, is that, uncapped credits that will be provided under IRA might be in the hundreds of billions of dollars. I mean, they estimate they estimate, I mean, Credit Suisse, this number at $339 billion, right? And under 45V provisions themselves, I mean, 45V and 45Q, that can be up to 85 billion, right? So I think we need to put the things into perspective that, yes, you know, this DOE money towards hubs is important catalyst, right? But I would think about this money as a catalyst. And I think, you know, at least, you know, the hubs that, you know, we are working with understand this very well. And, you know, they are already planning their journey far beyond, you know, this potential funding that they may receive, and plan their work for a much longer term future.
So I appreciate all of those thoughts. You know, we've talked about demand, we've talked about, you know, the impact of these hubs, and we've talked about some money. But the next topic is about politics, and that money is very much associated with politics. I see a lot of questions about the price of the fuel, and that is going to be directly affected by politics. And so, you know, it's not you know, when we see these numbers by the DOE, that is assuming that hydrogen can roam free, and that it won't be, you know, the way that we produce hydrogen will be as restrained. We're seeing a lot of restrictions coming up with hydrogen, and so it's really some of the stuff that may come potentially out of the IRS guidance with respect to the IRA tax credits, but also we're seeing restrictions on the state basis of what kinds of hydrogen we can produce and the types of incentives that they can receive. Ideally, you know, one of our positions as a trade association focused on policy development is to ensure that there are policies that are actually bringing down the cost of the fuel, as well as the demand side as well. You know, if I'm going to go in order again, so Abe, Angelina, and then Oleksiy, if you can comment on what you're already seeing on the policy side, policies that look like they are emerging, some of the arguments that are being made from, shall we call them, hydrogen antagonists, that you know will directly affect your hub or the success of your hub or you know, the cost of the fuel.
Thanks, Roxana. I'm gonna take a tangent, so I'll apologize. Policy is super important, but like the tangent I want to take is just that we were pretty bullish about the existing policies that we have in Oregon and Washington that are just forcing the use of hydrogen, which of course is great for our business. HB 2021 in Oregon requires carbon reduction, 80% carbon reduction by 2030. CETA is CETA in Washington State requires an 80%. No, am I getting this right? I think there's 100% by 2030 carbon reduction. So utilities are responding to that, and they are they have these existing infrastructure in these combustion turbines, which I already spoke about. But the policy is really pushing them to find a decarbonated fuel, and hydrogen is really the only option. You know, batteries, yes, but not for long duration of any extent. So we're pretty excited about existing policies here in Oregon and Washington. Thanks.
Well, we should give kudos to the policies that are supporting this industry and the advocates that have been behind that. So shout out to Michelle with RHA and those in Washington State, like that have been doing this advocacy work.
Yeah, I think it's very important to align the policies with the objectives of the programs as well, and ensure that the policies are not working across purpose with the objectives, that there clearly is a need as we go towards deep decarbonization, and penetrations of 60, 70, 80, 100% renewable energy throughout the economic infrastructure, that we have a fuel and we have the option for an electric renewable energy-based fuel, which is what hydrogen is. California, too, like Oregon, has an objective of being carbon-free across the board, full decarbonization of the economy by 2045. And greenhouse gas emissions below 80% below 1990 levels required by law as well. So we do, and we have SB 100, which requires 100% renewable energy on the grid. And of course, the technologies that support it. Certainly, we can electrify everything, and certainly we should use batteries and we should use renewables to the extent we can and the technologies that support them, but we should also recognize the role of carbon-free fuels, one of which is hydrogen, and the hydrogen derivatives, and what we need to do and how we need to approach those goals. So if you have a state like California, Oregon, or many other states right now that have 100% renewable energy goals, and those states are integrating and trying to utilize hydrogen as well, the notion of additionality becomes a tricky issue, right? Because what is additionality? Is additionality something that you're going to do anyway, because you're on a path of being carbon-free and it's going to happen? Or is additionality going to put a focus on hydrogen, kind of, in my opinion, in an unfair way, because that focus doesn't exist for batteries or any other technologies, to require that the renewables that are powering the hydrogen system should be above and beyond any portfolio goals that you may have that take you towards that 100% goal. So being careful how we parse that out, how we look at it, and how we build the policies and the policies foundations so that we achieve the objectives. Everybody wants to decarbonize, yes. Everybody wants cleaner air, yes. Everybody wants renewables and hydrogen fuels to succeed. Let's make sure we work together to focus in the areas where hydrogen can certainly have the biggest impact and the largest bang for the buck, to focus where, like with renewables and batteries, we have that incentive package that allows us to reduce the costs of hydrogen to where it's competitive with fossil fuels as fast as possible. We did that with solar, we've done it with wind, we've done it with batteries now too, to where you see the cost curves. And I'm talking about renewable energy and associated technologies, not as subsidies. They don't receive subsidies, they receive incentives over a certain period of time that are ratcheted down until you reach cost parity. We've achieved that with solar, where solar now costs a fraction of what it did 10 years ago, reductions in cost of over 90%. We've achieved that with wind, where the reduction of wind technology has reached over 80%. Batteries are on scale to get there as well. So clearly, we have experience, we know how to do it. We want to achieve the same with hydrogen, but we shouldn't be handicapped unfairly, and we shouldn't be targeting the industry unfairly too, because there is some misperception that it is an extension for the fossil industry to last longer than it should, which I think we need to educate the public and other stakeholders on much more aggressively. And there's also a misperception that for some reasons, hydrogen may increase pollution as opposed to reduce it in certain applications, especially combustion. I realize there is sensitivities around that area. We need to work towards it. There's certainly technologies that can address and mitigate this. But in any case, it is going to be at a level lower than the most efficient gas turbines, natural gas turbines. And so it's going to be a technology that gives us the benefits of reduced carcinogens, reduced toxins, reduced CO2 emissions, and all the other benefits. And I think the only chemical we're talking about is NOx. So we need to figure out how we address NOx, and the technologies to address it do exist. And that's also a technology education issue that we need to collectively as an industry focus on. And then the argument about water as well, that is something we need to be looking at. Do we need to focus on desalination in the medium and longer term? Maybe. There's technologies that are now starting to emerge that can use salt water directly. But there's also the fact that no matter what we do, the largest user of freshwater resources after agriculture worldwide is the fossil industry. Going hydrogen is not going to increase water use more than the existing fossil industry anyway. So that is no reason to stagnate the industry and not move forward aggressively as well. It is a pathway we need to pursue. It's a pathway that gets us to that deep decarbonization we're all looking to do. So we've got to mobilize all resources to make sure that we educate stakeholders, we educate the public, that we endorse the technologies that actually get us where we need to go, and that we have a policy package that supports all objectives. I have no opinion on the issue, as you can see.
Well, I think Angelina, you've covered quite a breadth here. I think I was thinking what can be added here on the policy side. I think, in my view, it's important to recognize that we need to pull all the levers and not to lose the objective inside. And I think you've defined the objective here very clearly. What we are trying to do is to bring hydrogen-based fuels to the cost parity with incumbent fuels, right? And the sooner we can get there, the sooner we wouldn't need any special policies, right, to drive the demand. And I think this is what we are trying to solve here, right? But while solving that, I think different mechanisms here should be in play, and I think they are complementary, right? So we've got this massive package of incentives coming from the federal government, which is directed mostly on to supply side. At least if you talk about IRA, we've got state level action to set the targets, which is super important. Like what Michelle has mentioned here as a Washington Clean Energy Transformation Act that requires 100% of clean energy by 2045. We have similar targets set up by other states. I think mandates can be also used and important, right? So California moving ahead and saying that by 2036 there should be no sale of internal combustion engine trucks in California. That's an important move because it signals to the market that where it has to be. And finally, of course, what I've learned when I moved to the US, that mandates and targets and sticks are not popular on their own. I think incentives of course should be there both at the federal and state level, and I think this is the kind of development that we start seeing more and more at the state level, where the state legislators are considering the incentives that are directed specifically at the end use sectors, which in our view is a very right move, right? Because every sector is different. The cost parity gap is different, and therefore if you can have this targeted incentives and targeted interventions without overdoing this and creating some non-transparency in the market, of course we should welcome such measures taken by the states.
Thank you so much, all three of you. Very lively discussion. So I bring this up because this is my day-to-day job, and I'm actually celebrating my 13th year anniversary with the industry, and hydrogen is my first love, and it feels criminal. If only I need age shirt right now, but I feel criminal by not mentioning, and I do mention this in every conference I work in or I speak at, is that we should be much more concerned. There aren't that many state policies. There are some state policies out there for hydrogen, but there's not enough. And the ones that are coming out aren't actually, I think that they are somewhat dangerous and actually hurting the industry right now. Now there's a lot of legislation out there that say that we can only derive hydrogen from water. And they're very specific about that, and it's saddening and very limiting to this industry, and that will change and affect the cost of the fuel, because there's so many different feedstocks that we can derive hydrogen from, so many, and they can actually all be renewable. Well, some of them could be renewable, but nonetheless, I mean, we can even derive hydrogen from trash, and so there's a lot of things that we we need to be watching very carefully, because all of these restrictions are going to ensure that the cost of the fuel is extremely high, or some of these projects are nearly impossible. And that's what we're seeing with if additionality is an additional requirement on producing hydrogen in any of these states, it becomes a huge issue. If that is something that happens federally, that's an additional issue for us. And really, if we want the market to thrive, we want every hydrogen processee to thrive, to have its ability to essentially be adopted in the right region that it makes the most sense in to utilize that production method. It's like us, limiting the demand side. So that's my little 2-second cry for help and just bringing awareness to this issue. And I don't know if anyone has any last words on this before we go and try to answer as many questions in here about from the audience, essentially.
I just wanted to say that I do agree with you that it is still a relatively nebulous area, and that we do need to focus on having a much more comprehensive and deeper approach into how we create parameters around hydrogen, and how we create policies around hydrogen, how we create regulations around hydrogen. Certainly codes and standards and safety need to be addressed, and they need to have a specific focus on hydrogen as well. And a package for hydrogen is something that the DOE has required, and I think is necessary in terms of codes, standards, protocols, maintenance, operation, certification, and making sure that we, again, have a more universal, comprehensive, and not a haphazard approach. And that would be important to get right from the very beginning in the industry too. So looking forward to seeing how this shapes up, and maybe some of the more active stakeholders trying to take a role in terms of creating that universe that's going to help hydrogen succeed and certainly be optimized across the board to help decarbonize the larger economies, not just for California as the 4th largest economy, but the greater West, and certainly nationally, and then collaborating on an international scale, because certainly the synergies are there between the US, with Europe, with the Middle East, and with others, to have a very large global hydrogen economy with shipping, with aviation, and with hydrogen as a product that is universally acceptable in numerous industries and applications.
I might say just one word on additionality. We want to build direct connected renewables for our electrolyzer, but with electrolyzer costs as high as they are right now in these early days, we want to run that electrolyzer as much as we possibly can, and that means pulling in renewables off the grid to sort of fill in around these direct connect new renewables that we do want to build. So we are also opposed to this additionality requirement for whatever that's worth here at Obsidian.
Well, we're not opposed. We just needed fine-tuning. We needed to recognize the needs of the industry and the needs of the electrolyzers, because, again, additionality is great, but you also have, in a very high penetration renewable energy system, you have the danger of curtailment, right? Or where you're selling additional power at a lower cost because you cannot curtail for a certain reason. So what's the value of whether it's batteries, electric vehicles, or hydrogen, or desalination, or anything else as a sink for those excess renewables? And as we build more renewables and integrate more renewables, there's going to be more and more danger of a curtailment. So those industries that allow you to optimize the system should be valued to a certain extent. And I think that exercise, that recognition, that process needs to start taking place not only for hydrogen, but for the other ancillary technologies that enable the full integration of renewables into a system as well.
Right, but that shouldn't be the only way to get hydrogen in general.
No.
That's not how a state limits hydrogen production, to that being its only role.
I'm sorry that it's all?
Limited to its only role, its only way of being incentivized or even studied.
Certainly not. I'm just saying it's one of the aspects that we haven't captured yet. There's many others. Yes.
Yeah,
many others.
And I know,
capture all of them.
I know, Yeah, and with your background in Cal ISO, like the California grid is something to manage. So understood. And Oleksiy.
We're almost out of time, I'm afraid. So thank you very much. Roxana, I don't know if you want to have some final words, but I'd just like to thank you very, very much. It's been an excellent, very informative webinar. Thank you, Roxana, very, very much. Thank you, Abe. Thank you, Oleg, and thank you, Angelina. It's been a great session. And of course, thank you to everyone who is there also on the other side. It wouldn't be possible without you. The point of these webinars is twofold. One, to inform, of course, that you learn more about the industries you're working on or the type of projects you'd like to work more on more. And the second is to meet, not in person, sure, but at least know who's the right person that you need to speak to when you have questions or you have things coming up. And these 4 people in this session are excellent contacts to have, excellent people to go to when you may have questions or there may be some issues that you are facing. So with that, I'd just like to remind you all that we are going to be in Las Vegas in July 12th and 13th, and to please come and join us. It's going to be a great discussion and sometime to actually, actually have face-to-face conversations that is very important today. So without further ado, thank you again, everyone. See you in the next webinar and see you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys.